Welcome to Real Grief, Real Healing with Mindy Corporon. I am your host, Mindy. A friend of mine told me in early 2018 that she saw a vision of me with a microphone in front of me. I laughed at the time and said, "I don't see any microphones in my future." Less than a year later, I was recording my first podcast on this show. I'm not going to say, "I hope you enjoy this podcast." My podcast is not truly meant to be enjoyed. Real grief, real healing is just that, real and raw. I provide you an opportunity to learn and share in the grief others are experiencing, and then we share how they are healing or perhaps not. Grief changes each of us in some way. Many of my guests have been encouraged to open new businesses, start foundations, and in general, work to make the world around us a better place. Grief is universal. How we decide to move onward, seeking healing, is individual. A significant part of my healing comes through the courageous kindness actions of others. As you listen to my podcasts, you will hear how you can give and receive courageous kindness too. Together, we are better.
Welcome to Real Grief, Real Healing with Mindy Corporon, taking a deep dive into the reality of the difficulty grief brings and offering insight into the healing available to each of us. Today, episode 46, Can't Let Moms Down, with special guest Chris Singleton. And now your host, Mindy Corporon.
Hi friends, it's Mindy Corporon. I am coming to you once again from my closet, and you might find that I am more emotional today during this podcast, and you'll know why once we get started. I'll let you know a little bit more. But if you hear that quivering in my throat and the hesitation in my words, you'll understand in just a few minutes when I introduce my guest. So I lost Dad and Reet and Terry Lamano lost her life in April of 2014. And then in 2015, on June 17th, there was another evil murder that happened. And I have to tell you, I wasn't paying that much attention to it because I was still in so much sorrow myself. But shortly after that, there was a program that came on ESPN, and it was called E60, and you might have heard of them if you follow ESPN at all. I know they have E30s and E60s. And I'm a sports nut, so I watch ESPN, all kinds of sports. And so I hadn't seen this program myself, but a friend of ours called right after he watched it. Actually, I think during the program, Dom DeChico, who I've written about and talked about in Healing a Shattered Soul. So our friend Dominic called and he said, "Lenny, Mindy, you have to turn on this E60 program." He said, "There's this young man talking, and it's showing him talking at a vigil held for those killed at the Emanuel Church in South Carolina." He said, "He's using the same words as you, Mindy. You must be kindred spirits." His name is Chris Singleton, and his mom was murdered that day. And so, like most information that comes in, I wrote it down, I processed it. And I think just several weeks later, I started tracking down Chris Singleton. And that had to be in either late 2015 or early 2016. And here we are in 2021, and he is sitting across from me, albeit in his own office, and we're on virtual, but it is the first time we've seen one another face to face. And I feel like we are kindred spirits because he has such a deep faith. He has a deep faith in God and in humanity and in helping others. And I can see him flourishing and growing, and I want my audience to hear from him. So, Chris, thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, wow. Thank you so much for having me. I truly appreciate it. So, Yeah, I do think we're a lot alike. Your voice is soothing too. My goodness. But thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
You are welcome. So I've been stalking Chris for quite a while, and I did reach out to him a few times when he was in college. I even looked at the opportunity to go see him before he graduated. He was a baseball player, and I want him to tell us all about that, and the field that got named after your mom. So Chris's mom is Sharonda Coleman-Singleton, and she's a pastor, a speech therapist, and a track coach. And most importantly for our conversation, she was Chris's mom who taught him so well. Wait till you hear about what this young man is doing because of the evil that took her life on June 17th. So, Chris, I want to start with a question about a hashtag. I really want to start with this, and then we'll back into some other things. But I want to start with a hashtag that I've seen you use, and you have hashtag can't let moms down. I want you to tell me about that.
Yeah, so this hashtag is something that I started maybe 6 months after my mother was taken away from me. And for me, it was a way for me to show everybody, hey, what everything that I do is to show them how good my mom did raising me, right? And I think we've always heard the term, it takes a village to raise a child, right? It takes a village to raise a young person in the way that they should go. But for me, as a young adult, I would always say, well, now I'm a direct reflection of my village. And so my ultimate goal is to not let my mom down in every aspect of my life. And so that's something that I did then, and I'm going to continue to do it. You'll still see it today, years and years later.
I see it. I do see it. And I didn't know how soon you created that hashtag, but I've seen it on many, many posts. I tend to follow you on LinkedIn. So I'm a big LinkedIn person, and I tend to follow you on that. Chris, you've also have authored some books. I saw that you authored a book called Different, a story about loving your neighbor. Can you tell us how that came to be?
Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't really grow up wanting to be an author, nothing like that. It sounds cool, but it's really hard to do, even when you talk about children's books. But, my message is about unity. It's about forgiveness. It's about resilience. But I said to myself, it's not my place to tell a second grader how tough the world is, right? Telling them that my mother was murdered because she was Black. I think that's just taking away a kid's innocence. And that's something that I don't want to do. And so I would always speak to companies, speak to schools, speak to different sports teams. But when I would get asked to speak to elementary schools, I would freeze. And I would say, I don't know if my message is for that audience. But I said, you know what? I could still share that message, but in a different way. And that's where the children's book came along. And like most people, it was a passion project. I actually self-published my first children's book. And I had this goal. I was like, if I sell 1,000 copies, that means that 1,000 families will get it, right? 1,000 families throughout the whole US. It was my big goal, 1,000. And the first day, the Obama Foundation shared it, and we sold like 1,500 in the first 6 hours. And I was like, my goodness, I got to order way more books than I thought I needed to. Yeah, and it's just grown from there.
That is fantastic. That is great. I'm so thankful for you that the Obama Foundation found you. That's fantastic that they found you and helped promote it. And is there another book? Am I correct? Your Life Matters, right?
Yeah, this was written last year in 2020, and for me, this was basically written during all the unrest that was going on around the country. And I saw a video of a kid who was playing basketball outside, and an officer drove by, and this kid got his ball and he hid behind the car because he was just scared. And I'm like, man, I don't think the officer meant any harm by just driving by, but the kid was so scared. And I wanted to let that kid know how much he means, right? How much he means to the world. And I said the words, your life matters. And so I just started to think about different heroes, Black heroes at that I could share with this kid and say, if they've done it, they matter. So do you. And, in total, people have just supported it. I think thus far, I've done around maybe 40,000 books over the last 2 years that we've sold for children's books. But it started out just wanting to sell 1,000. And so I'm just going to continue to do it. And people have supported it. So it's been a blessing for sure.
Well, you are a blessing. I mean, I'm sure that my audience listening is going, oh my goodness. Okay. So he's already written 2 children's books and they're doing really well. And you just wrote them out of passion from your heart, passion to help other children understand the importance of the village that you had. Let's talk about your mom. I want you to tell me, what do you want to share about your mom with anybody, with our audience? Tell us all about Sharonda.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing that I learned from my mom, number one, is how to communicate. Right, my mother was a speech language pathologist, and she never let me talk slang. Right, she would always smack me upside the back of the head and say, "Boy, say it the right way." Right,
Uh,
and so it's funny thinking that now my job, the way that I feed my family, is by speaking. Right, I'm on the road 160 days out of the year. I did 121 talks this year, uh, by using the gift that my mother basically taught me. Um, she was also, I think the best thing about her was when it came to her faith, she wasn't a person that was overbearing, right? Sometimes we meet people and it's all right. You should shine the light, but some people, they shining so bright that you want to look away, And my mother was just, she would just place that love of faith like a blanket on people, right? And she just loved people. She was caring. She would kiss you on the cheek, give you a hug, that kind of person. And so in turn, that's how I am. When I meet somebody, I'm not a handshaker. It's tough for me to be in the COVID era because I want to give somebody a hug. And she taught me that by just being a genuinely good person. So that's my mom, and I miss her every day.
I'm sure you do. Now, I know because of your mom's tragic death, because she was murdered and you were young at the time, you have younger siblings. And I'd like you to give us an indication of what responsibilities fell on you at her death.
Yeah, well, you know what? I say my brother and sister are stronger than I am because, my brother was 12, my sister was 15. And yeah, I was so-called, I guess, taking care of them once both of our parents died, because my dad died about a year after my mom. And so they came to live with me and my wife, and it was tough. It was tough. I didn't know if I should be father figure or just be big brother. I'd try to say something and they're looking at me like, just shut up. Right. So I didn't know what I should do or which way I should go about it. But the beauty in it is, now they're actually home for the holidays. My sister and my brother are in college. Um, they're home for the holidays and we've got such a great bond. And I feel like sometimes when tragedy strikes, it tears families apart. But sometimes it just brings them so much closer together. And we were already close, but now there's nothing I don't share with them and vice versa.
That's wonderful. I appreciate that I know you didn't elaborate much about it being hard, about raising them and having them in your home, and whether you're a big brother or a father figure. I could see on the look on your face, there's a lot more under that. There's a lot more to unpack at some point.
Yeah, I'll even share this. So one of the things that I struggle with is, for me, the way that I'm wired is, hey, I want to do everything for my mom. We got to do this. We got to do that. We got to be great for my mom. And in their process, sometimes they just need to stop and just say, Chris, I know you're super driven, but that's not me, right? I want to just relax for a second, right? I want to sit down and the way that I process my feelings isn't by wanting to change the world, right? The way that I process them by is just sitting here and doing nothing. And it was a process of me learning that that's where they were and that's how they would grieve. And so it was tough in that sense. It's also tough. You got to think I'm only 5 years older than my sister, 7 years older than my brother. So I'm 21 and he's telling him what to do and he's 13 and she's, they're looking at me like, dude, you're barely older than us. What are you telling us what to do for? But it was good. Now they look at me, and hopefully if they were in the room and they heard me say this, they would agree. But I think they look at me like, man, look, I see what Chris has done. I see what's possible, even after we've gone through the worst of the worst.
Yeah. And I appreciate that you said to our audience and learned, obviously a little bit the hard way. I learned the hard way too, that even inside the own walls of our homes, we grieve differently. And so you ran right into that. It's like this, it was a moving train and you were trying to figure out what to do on it. That's how I felt because my husband and our younger son was 12 He was 12 years old when my dad and Reet were murdered. And we were in the same house, but we grieved very differently. And it was hard. It was very hard. So I write about that in Healing a Shattered Soul. And I'm curious, is there a book in you about your process, about your struggles and your joys from the time your mom's life was taken?
That's good. I think there is. I guess if I had to sum it up quickly with like my outlook on things, it's um number one, now when I cry, it's more of like it's memories, right? And it used to be cry and it'd be super sad and I just had sad weeks or a sad day but now it's just like, man, that tear was just a memory for me now, right? Another thing that I wholeheartedly believe is that life is so tough for some people, unfortunately, right? And for me and for you, we've gone through things that we wouldn't wish upon our worst enemies. And I process that, and I'm okay with being sad. But I also say I'm not going to stay there. I'm not going to stay there. I'm going to process it. I'm going to, sit in that for a little while. But I also have a loving family, right? I have a son that I want to take to Disney World. And so it's okay for me to be sad, but I want to create happy memories in the future, which we've done so far.
That's great. I'm sorry, I was looking down while I was writing notes. So I was like, that is great. I was writing down what Chris was saying, because if you're in my audience now and you're hearing what he's saying and you've listened to what I've said before, we are so closely related to one another about how we process things. I don't think I've met anyone who says the same words that I say. So, if you read my book at some point or listen to my book, you'll hear how I say you have to sit in it. You have to sit in the sadness, and then you have to move out of it and find joy and understand that you can feel sadness and joy at exactly the same time. And so I'm just so overwhelmed. Okay, so I do want you to tell us about your June 17th, 2015. I'd like you to go ahead now and give us that depiction of what June 17th and maybe June 18th and 19th were like. How were they for you in 2015?
Yeah, I'd say, first, June 17th for me was like something you only see on TV, right? You never think it'll happen to you. And even now, unfortunately, Mindy, it's like sometimes people, they see things happen now and it's just a scroll, right? It's just, hey, it happened, but it's not me. And unfortunately, when it's you, there is no scrolling. And so for me, man, I was 18 years old. I finished a baseball game like I would any other night. And, I remember actually calling my mom and asking her where my brother's computer keyboard was because she had a rule where he had to read a book before could play video games in the summer. And so I asked her for it. She actually stepped outside of church and we talked for a little while. And the next call that I got from my mom, I thought it was her, but it was somebody else calling from her phone saying, Chris, you got to get down here right now. And ultimately, I came down there, found out the worst of the worst news, found out that she was taken away. And the scary and sad part about it was when you're in a scene like that, there's social media going on because this is everywhere on the news. Your mom was at Bible study. You're seeing tweets about people that were killed, but nobody's telling you for sure that your mom is gone, right? And so there's all these questions that are going through your mind. There's hope, obviously, that it's not your mom, but the communication was tough for me. Ultimately, I had to tell my brother and sister that mom was gone, and there was no sleep that night. I actually slept with my little brother, who was 12 at the time, who basically cried himself to sleep that night. And the next day was the day that I actually forgave my mother's killer. And I wish I could put it into worldly terms, like non-faith-based terms of how that happened. But sometimes you're on autopilot, and I was on autopilot when I forgave my mother's killer. Uh, and that's when I did the prayer vigil, like you're talking about. But all that was just a blur for me, to be honest with you. It's not like any of that was just planned or I thought this would happen. No, I didn't think any of that stuff would happen. It was a blur. And following that, obviously played baseball, and now I am where I am today. But I call that day the unthinkable.
That sounds like a good book title.
Yeah, for
That
sure.
sounds like a good book title, The Unthinkable.
You know what? We might get a publishing deal after all these books we're talking about. A big time, a 10 book publishing deal talking about all these books we think we can write. So, no, I do think that'd be good. It's helpful, man. I love hearing people's perspectives and their stories because everybody's got one. And how can I use yours to help me in my future? So, I think that's good.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. It's definitely a very difficult life journey that we have been put on, but both of us and you and who we're focusing on today are just, you are a very shining light. You are a shining light. Okay. So I also see in your posts often, love is stronger than hate. So when did you start saying and believing and feeling and letting other people know that love is stronger than hate?
Yeah, that's another thing that I shared the night after my mother was killed, when I forgave my mother's killer. And it wasn't like I knew the power in those words. They honestly just came out. I'd be lying if I said, "Hey, yeah, I knew exactly what I was saying when I said it." No, I didn't. But I realize now what that means. So for me, if I want somebody to change their perspective or change their heart by hating them and telling them where they're wrong or why they're wrong every single day, it's not going to do it. You got to build a connection by showing them love and hearing their story and, you know, having empathy. Like those things is what moves the needle. Unfortunately, if we don't do those things, nobody's listening. If you say 2 + 2 is 5 and I know it's 4 and I just keep telling you why you're wrong, you're going to not want to listen to me even more. But if I say, you know what, how did you even get to 5? Because I want to figure that out. Let me love on you to figure that out so we can grow together. That's where growth happens. And I've seen it happen in real life with the work that I do now. And that's why I believe that loving somebody to change their heart, hopefully, in a good place, is always better than telling them how bad they are and hating them to change. It won't work that way.
Mm-hmm. Tell me about, I want to go back to forgiveness. You mentioned forgiveness twice and I wrote it down and I wanted to think about that. Tell me, now, you can look back now and for several years, I'm sure you've looked back and said, in a blur, you forgave the murderer. Tell me what that means to you. Tell me what forgiveness means to you.
Yeah. So forgiveness to me, it is freedom to move forward. So basically, if you want to forgive somebody, you have to figure out what it does for you. Because if forgiving somebody, if you think it's doing something for them, I think you're mistaken. Because number one, in my case at least, he's never said sorry for what he's done, right? So forgiving him is not letting him off the hook by any means. I haven't forgotten about it. But it's freed me to not think that all young white males are racist like he was or he is. I don't know if he still is or not. He's never said he's not, but he said he was. So it's freed me from that. But I think if we truly want to forgive somebody, we have to figure out what's on the other side of it for us. And my faith tells me, right, as a believer, that number one, I'm forgiven because of the sacrifice that was already made for me, right? There's something on the other side of forgiveness. And if you can't figure out what's on the other side of it, then you don't ever want to do it. Why would you? How is it beneficial for you? It's freedom for me. It's freed me from just thinking the thoughts that I thought before. And I said I forgave my mother's killer the day after, but I didn't know it was true until I stopped having these dreams that I used to have. And I actually want my mother's killer to repent and to say sorry, right? Will it ever happen? I don't know, but that's something that I do want. And I think forgiveness showed me, well, man, if I'm in a place where I want him to grow as a human being, forgiveness is real. So yeah, that's what I think about it. And I've realized it's for me, not him. And now I have tons of friends, tons of people that I meet that, if I hadn't forgiven my mother's killer, I don't know if I'd be able to be friends with somebody like this. And so that's what it's done for me.
It's really, I'm very happy for you that you've processed it that way. I didn't use the word forgiveness out of my mouth for a period of time, as far as I know, but people looked at what I said and how I behaved, and they told me that I had forgiven. And I was like, what are you talking about? And so I had to think through what my behavior was showing. And what my behavior was showing was that I was not going to hold hate in my heart. I wasn't going to allow hate to fester in my heart. It's similar to you. We don't use the murderer's name. We don't use his name ever. And I don't want to. And similar to you, I did pray for him. He's no longer living. He passed away May 3rd of 2021 in prison. But I had prayed for him that he would feel the love at some point, that he would somehow feel love like I had felt love, so that he would know the joy of it and what he had taken from us. There was like no way for him to understand what he had taken from us if he couldn't feel love. And it's my expectation that he never felt that. But I did remove him from my heart. That was forgiveness to me.
That's good. And you know what? I think I've got a different outlook on that. For me, the part of the work that I do now is to stop the next Dylan Roof from happening, right? So his name was Dylan Roof. And I actually will share his name from time to time, because sometimes when we don't share their names, we just think it was just a demon. It was just something out there, right? It was just a bad energy. It was just this, or like he was possessed, or whatever, what people will say. And I got to remind people, hey, he also was a second grader that went to elementary school, just like your kids do, right? He also went to high school. He had a job just like most kids have it. And so sometimes we think that this is just an energy out there, but it was a real human being. And so the person that's saying racist little remarks that you think is nothing, that's real, right? And Dylan Root was saying those things. And so I just try to remind people that, hey, yes, he was evil. There was a terrible force behind it, but he also was somebody's son. He was somebody's cousin. And if you have a son or a cousin that's saying things that you know they shouldn't be saying, let's stop that from happening, because you never know what that's going to lead to. And I'm hopeful that by me sharing that it stops somebody, or they kind of say, you know what, maybe I should tell Johnny to stop using those words, or maybe my grandfather isn't just, old timey thinking. Maybe he does have some hate in his heart that I need to change. So, man, that's good though. I like that.
I appreciate you sharing why you use his name. I do. And I value that you do that. We've selected to not use our killer's name because we just don't want people to send the energy that way. But I do say, like you do, I say, but he espoused these hateful things for so long and no one stopped him. No one said anything. And you have to confront it. You have to confront it and overcome it and say when it's wrong. But I really appreciate hearing why you use his name. I value that and understand it more now. So I appreciate that. Okay. I have something really funny that I want to ask you about as we're coming to a close. So there was something posted on your Facebook page. Again, I was stalking you, looking for any little nuggets of fun things. And one of the children who heard you speak wrote you a letter. And on the letter was the message, "Sexy chocolate." And then there was a picture of an ice cream cone. And I'm just curious, do you remember that letter? It's posted somewhere because that's how I saw it.
Absolutely, I do. And it's a funny story, because in the art of telling my story and the art of speaking to kids, you have to have moments of laughter. You have to have moments where you can stop talking and give them a break from all the really hard things that I'm sharing, right? It's not easy to sit through somebody talking about their pain that hurts so much, right? And so one of the things that I share is my mom had an embarrassing tattoo, and it was an ice cream cone, and it said "sexy chocolate" on it. And so in my talk, I'll stop and I'll say, she was a teacher, but your teachers would never have a tattoo like my mom, right? Sexy chocolate with an ice cream cone. Any teacher have an embarrassing tattoo? And all the kids will look at the teachers like, oh my gosh, they do have a tattoo. I saw it. Ms. Johnson does, right? And that was just like a little small moment of just, just a little release from the tough things that we talk about. And apparently she thought it was hilarious and remembered it and drew it.
She did. She did. I'm so glad I asked you about it because I was looking at her page that you posted and she had all kinds of things that you could tell that she remembered from what you had spoken about. And I could not for the life of me understand why she wrote. Well, what I thought she wrote was that you were sexy chocolate. That's what I was thinking. I was thinking, oh, this little girl thinks he's sexy chocolate. I've got to ask him about that. So now we've drawn the connection to your mom's tattoo. I'm curious, do you have an ice cream cone tattooed on you somewhere?
You know what? I don't. I don't know if I ever will, though, to be honest. But another part of my story is, meeting a lady who talked about the way she teaches her kids, black and white and, different races, is just calls them ice cream, vanilla ice cream, chocolate ice cream, and all these different things. And so it's funny how things aligned with my mom's tattoo. And I think that connection when I shared with the kid also made her remember it as well.
Oh, that's a great story. I mean, they will remember that. She will for sure, but so many children, that's a wonderful way to get them, to remember all the things that you talked about, is to give them that connection. Chris, I'm glad I didn't cry through the whole program. I am so blessed and honored to see you face to face, and I hope that we can stay connected. I know that you're super busy. For my guest, Chris is, if you want to follow him on Facebook or LinkedIn, I'll have all of his links in my resources in my notes, but he is talking and speaking all over the country, and he's got books for sale, and you clearly have this amazing message, and you are shining a light, and you can shine it as brightly as you would like.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I never thought I would be on the road like I am now, right? Speaking to different teams and schools and companies and stuff, but I'm just trying not to let my mom down, right? That's the mission.
Yeah. You know what? I want to give you one opportunity too, and I should have thought about this, but I'm thinking about it now. What would you want to tell our listeners about, what are you telling people in presentations? What's your message right now for 2022? Obviously, we went through COVID. We've had riots after riots. We've got school shootings. Where is your positivity, and what are you telling people now? What do you want to leave us with?
Yeah, well, number one, I know we go through some really sad things, or we see them happening left and right, but I think there is more good than bad happening in the world. We just don't celebrate the good as much, right? Celebrate this podcast like we should. Everybody should be celebrating this thing. But if I had one message that I want to leave with every single person listening, and this sums up my mission, it's that everybody's got a story behind their stance. I know you think you believe what you believe, and there's a reason why you do, right? Either you experienced something or you were taught it by somebody. But the person that thinks a little differently, you vote red, they vote blue, or whatever it may be. There's a story behind that. I don't like guns because my mother was murdered with one, right? And so there's a story behind it. But we see somebody's stance and we automatically write them off. My question, or my ask of everybody, is that when we see somebody that thinks different than us, let's not write them off, because we'll remember that there's a story behind their stance.
Thank you. Thank you. Everyone, Chris Singleton, be sure and check out everything that he's got going on. He's somebody to follow. Thank you so much, Chris, for joining us on Real Grief, Real Healing.
Thank you so much for having me.
Friends, thanks so much for joining me today for this podcast of Real Grief, Real Healing with Mindy Corporon. If you want to dive deeper into how you might heal yourself or a friend, please pick up a copy of my book, Healing a Shattered Soul. Published on May 3rd, 2021, you can find my memoir anywhere books are sold. You will also find me in social media channels as Mindy Corporon. Take time to help yourself heal. Accepting courageous kindness. Take time to heal another by giving courageous kindness. Together, we are better.
Real Grief, Real Healing is copyright 2021 to 2022, Mindy Corporon, all rights reserved. Our theme music is composed by Dave Croft and used with permission. This podcast is a production of 818 Studios.